There is a hidden truth about global power that the established financial and political elites understand with crystalline, mechanical precision. It is a formula, a script repeated across history that determines which nation will rule the world and which will succumb to dependency. This formula is not about debt or market cycles or even military spending alone. It is about the absolute monopolistic control of a strategic resource that powers the next phase of civilization. For the last 3 centuries, every dominant superpower, every empire, has been built on this single, inescapable architectural blueprint. It is the power to decide who gets the resource and who doesn't. It is the leverage to shut down your enemy's economies without firing a shot, and the ultimate tool to dictate terms to the entire world. We are living through the fifth most critical iteration of this script, and the stakes could not be higher. Today, that strategic resource is rare earth elements, and the dominant architect is the People's Republic of China. The modern world, our digital infrastructure, our electric vehicles, our entire green energy transition, and most critically, the technological edge of the U.S. military. All of it is mathematically dependent on a single nation that controls over 90% of the required processing. This is not an alarmist theory. It is a strategic catastrophe built on a decades-long strategic mistake. Before we deconstruct the present danger, we must first understand the 3 essential characteristics that define a strategic resource monopoly. If a resource possesses all 3, the nation that controls it achieves the status of a geopolitical superpower. First, the resource must be essential. Civilization cannot function without it. In the 1800s, this was coal, the fuel of the Industrial Revolution. No coal meant no factories, no trains, no power. In the 1900s, this was oil, the fuel of the modern world. No oil meant no cars, no planes, no tanks, no modern economy. Today, rare earth elements, the 17 metallic elements like neodymium, dysprosium, and europium, are essential. No rare earths means no smartphones, no computers, no wind turbines, no EVs, and crucially, no advanced weapon systems. Second, the resource must be non-substitutable. You cannot swap it out for something else without a catastrophic loss of function. You cannot run a jet on coal. You cannot make a smartphone screen without the specific luminescent properties of europium and terbium. The unique magnetic, luminescent, and electrochemical properties of REEs are required by the technology itself. Researchers are scrambling to find alternatives for magnets, but for now, the technology simply requires these specific elements. Third, the resource must be geographically concentrated. It is not evenly distributed across the globe. A few places have them, and most do not. If one nation gains monopoly control over the places that have them, or more accurately, controls the infrastructure required to make them usable, that nation controls everyone who needs them. China controls the vast majority of the global processing infrastructure, which is the critical bottleneck. When a nation secures this complete, non-substitutable control, it gains 3 corresponding types of power. Economic power, the ability to set prices, control supply, and extract wealth from every other consuming nation. Military power, the capability to fuel and build their own military while simultaneously denying the critical materials to their enemies. They can rival militaries in blockade supply without ever firing a shot. And finally, political power, the ultimate leverage to force other nations into compliance. The ultimatum is simple and brutal. Align with our goals, or we cut you off. Accept our terms, or your economy stops. That is the mechanical definition of geopolitical leverage. 4 times in modern history, this leverage has been achieved. We saw it with Britain's coal. We saw it with America's oil. We saw it again with the OPEC oil cartel. And now, we are witnessing the consolidation of power through China's rare earth monopoly. The pattern: discovery, development, monopoly, dependency, leverage, and collapse is identical every time. The U.S. and the entire developed world is currently mired in stage 5, monopoly exploitation. This is the stage where the monopolist uses their power, and the consequences for the global economy are already beginning to materialize. To grasp the acute danger of the rare earth trap, we must first deconstruct the historical mechanics of the 6-stage resource monopoly pattern. This pattern is the engine of global power cycles, and its destructive force is revealed with stark clarity when we look back at the rise and fall of industrial empires. The first great cycle was the age of British coal, 1800s. Before this era, the world operated on muscle, human labor, animal power, and limited wind and water mills. Energy was diffuse, production was limited, and wealth was constrained. Stage 1. Resource discovery. The inherent, concentrated energy of coal was discovered. Burn it, boil water, create steam, and power machines. This discovery unlocked the potential for industrialization, moving civilization from agrarian limits to mechanical efficiency. Stage 2. Infrastructure development. Britain, sitting atop massive coal deposits, rapidly built the infrastructure to exploit this resource. By 1800, Britain was mining 10 million tons annually. By 1900, 225 million tons. More critically, they built the railroads, the coal-powered factories, and the steam engines. The system required to use the resource at scale. This decades-long head start was the strategic advantage. Stage 3. Monopoly establishment. By 1850, Britain controlled the majority of the supply, producing more than 50% of the world's coal, iron, and textiles. They became, indisputably, the factory of the world. Stage 4. Global dependency. Every rival nation that sought to industrialize, to build railroads, or to move goods across oceans was forced to rely on Britain or its coal-powered technology. The British Navy switched from sail to coal-powered steam warships, making them faster and independent of the wind. The British controlled coaling stations in critical choke points: Gibraltar, Egypt, India, Singapore, South Africa, meaning any rival who sought naval power needed Britain's permission to refuel. Stage 5. Monopoly exploitation leverage. Britain used this leverage to build and maintain the largest empire in human history, ruling 25% of the Earth's land surface by 1900. Their economic, military, and political dominance was built, brick by strategic brick, on coal. Stage 6. Monopoly collapse. The cycle was broken when other nations, such as Germany and America, found their own coal deposits and industrialized. Critically, the strategic resource of the 1800s coal was replaced by the resource of the 1900s oil. This brings us to the second great cycle. American oil, 1945, 1975. The discovery of the internal combustion engine in the late 19th century rapidly shifted the essential resource from coal to oil. Stage 1. Resource discovery. After Edwin Drake drilled the first commercial oil well in 1859, oil initially replaced whale oil for kerosene lamps, but with the internal combustion engine, oil became fuel for cars, trucks, and ships. Stage 2. Infrastructure development. America discovered massive oil fields across Pennsylvania, Texas, Oklahoma, and California. More importantly, America built the entire surrounding infrastructure: refineries, pipelines, gas stations, highways, and the modern consumer economy designed around cheap, abundant oil. Stage 3. Monopoly establishment. By 1920, America was producing 60% of the world's oil. This monopoly was secured by the time of World War II, where oil became the definitive strategic resource. The Allies won, in large part, because America had the oil supply to fuel its own military and that of Britain and the Soviet Union, while Germany and Japan were starving for fuel. By 1945, America was the Saudi Arabia of the mid-1900s, producing nearly 50% of the world's oil. Stage 4. Global dependency. The post-war world accepted the Bretton Woods system and the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency because the U.S. held both the economic and military power, which were fundamentally built on oil dominance. The entire structure of global trade and defense became dependent on America's capacity to project power, which was fueled by its own supply. Stage 5. Monopoly exploitation leverage. The American century, the economic boom, the suburbs, the consumer society, was built entirely on the mechanical foundation of cheap, abundant oil. By 1970, the U.S. was the sole superpower, its strength inseparable from its control of the resource. Stage 6. Monopoly collapse. This monopoly ended not when the resource changed, but when America's domestic production peaked in the 1,970 seconds. Suddenly, the U.S. was consuming more than it produced, creating a vulnerability that the OPEC cartel was quick to exploit. The third cycle, the OPEC oil cartel, 1973, 1988, demonstrated that full ownership is not necessary. Sufficient control to set prices is enough. In 1973, OPEC members, led by Saudi Arabia, used the oil embargo to punish nations supporting Israel. Oil prices quadrupled overnight, economies crashed, and the U.S. learned the terrifying truth of dependency. This moment proved that if someone else controls what you need, they control you. The lessons from all three cycles are mathematically identical. The monopolist secures the infrastructure. Development dictates the supply. Monopoly creates total reliance, dependency, and finally weaponizes that control, leverage, exploitation. Today, this ancient pattern has found its perfect modern expression in China's control over rare earth elements. The great resource cycles of coal and oil were merely rehearsals for the current, technologically absolute crisis, the rare earth trap. This time, the strategic resource is not a fuel source powering the machines of industry, but the fundamental chemical and magnetic building blocks of every piece of modern, advanced technology. The 17 rare earth elements, neodymium, dysprosium, terbium, europium, and the rest are essential because they possess unique properties that are non-substitutable in commercial and military applications. This is stage 1, resource discovery for the digital electrified century. Neodymium is the basis of the world's strongest permanent magnets, essential for the motors in electric vehicles and wind turbines. Every EV battery requires kilograms of it, and every massive offshore wind turbine requires hundreds of kilograms. Dysprosium and terbium are critical additions, allowing those magnets to operate at the high temperatures required by fighter jets and high-performance motors without losing their magnetic field. Europium and terbium give your smartphone screen its vibrant red and green colors. Lanthanum is found in specialized camera lenses and advanced nickel metal hydride batteries. Without these elements, the technological revolution of the 21st century comes to an immediate grinding halt. The profound strategic blunder by the United States and the Western allies began precisely at stage 2, infrastructure development. For decades, the U.S. was the leading global supplier. The Mountain Pass mine in California was, for a time, the world's most significant source of rare earths. But then, China entered the market with a cold, calculated, long-term strategy. The Chinese government heavily subsidized production, implemented lax environmental regulations, a significant cost in the highly toxic process of rare earth refining, and exploited cheap labor. The immediate result was that Chinese rare earths were simply cheaper than the American supply. Western corporations, driven by the myopic pursuit of short-term profit and quarterly returns, made the catastrophic decision to outsource production. The U.S. government, blinded by the perceived stability of a globalized economy, allowed it. The Mountain Pass mine closed in 2002. The domestic processing capacity of the United States was systematically dismantled, sold off, or simply left to decay. The architects of this strategic failure were the financial elites and political leaders who prioritized cheap imports over national security and industrial independence. This deliberate state-sponsored campaign by Beijing was executed with mechanical precision. In the 1,990 seconds, Deng Xiaoping, the paramount leader of China, famously declared, "The Middle East has oil, China has rare earths." This was not a casual observation, it was a blueprint. While the West viewed rare earths as a niche commodity, China understood them as the geopolitical leverage point of the future. They invested decades and billions of dollars in building the complex infrastructure that the West was dismantling. This led directly to stage 3, monopoly establishment. Today, China does not just control the mining, they control the processing. While China mines about 70% of the world's rare earth ore, they control an overwhelming 90% of global processing capacity. This distinction is everything. Mining the ore is merely extracting dirty rock from the ground. Turning that ore into the refined, high-purity metals and compounds needed for a fighter jet or an EV motor requires complex, specialized chemical separation and refining, a difficult, environmentally hazardous, and knowledge-intensive industrial process. China built this processing bottleneck, and no other nation has the full, vertically integrated supply chain necessary to compete. The result is stage 4, global dependency, and it is total. Every advanced nation is now structurally reliant on Beijing. The United States imports 80% of its rare earths from China. Europe and Japan rely on them for over 90% and nearly 100% respectively. This dependency is not limited to consumer electronics like iPhones and laptops. It cuts to the core of national security and military supremacy. Consider the F-35 Lightning II, the most advanced fighter jet in the U.S. arsenal. It requires 920 pounds of rare earth materials for its avionics, targeting systems, stealth coatings, and, critically, the magnets in its essential power systems. Virginia-class submarines use thousands of pounds. Precision-guided missiles, the linchpin of modern warfare, rely on rare earth magnets for guidance and control. If China chooses to cut off this supply, the U.S. military's technological edge, its ability to build new weapons and even maintain its existing advanced fleet stops. The Pentagon has officially labeled this reliance a strategic vulnerability. The entire Western push toward green energy is equally compromised. The transition to electric vehicles, the mass deployment of wind turbines, and the installation of solar panels are all mathematically dependent on Chinese processed rare earths. This means that China does not just control the future of modern warfare. They control the pace and direction of the global climate transition. The ultimate illustration of this inescapable predicament is the ongoing situation at the Mountain Pass mine. The mine was successfully reopened by MP Materials, and it is now once again extracting rare earth concentrate. However, for a period, that concentrate, the dirty, mined ore, had to be shipped thousands of miles across the Pacific to China for processing, only to be bought back by Western manufacturers as refined metal. This is the brutal definition of the rare earth trap: dependency with extra steps. While MP Materials is actively building out its processing capacity for light rare earths, the capacity for heavy rare earths, which are essential for high-temperature military magnets, remains a major bottleneck requiring years of further development. This brings us to the present moment, deep into Stage 5, monopoly exploitation. Beijing is not simply holding the resource, they are actively weaponizing the choke point. In 2010, China temporarily restricted rare earth exports, causing prices to spike 10 times higher, sending a clear, non-negotiable warning to the world. More recently, in a further act of strategic tightening, China has restricted the export of the technology required to process and manufacture high-performance rare earth magnets. This is a move to stifle competing development in the West, ensuring that even if the U.S. manages to mine its own ore, it cannot efficiently create the high-end final products needed for its defense and technology sectors. China has secured a decade-long window of near absolute leverage. Building the complex processing infrastructure and training the necessary workforce takes a minimum of 7 to 10 years. Even if the US, Europe, and Australia started mass construction today, true independence, the capacity to refine and process all required materials domestically, would not be achieved until 2035 at the earliest. During this critical window, China holds the key to the modern global economy, the energy transition, and the American military arsenal. The strategic resource pattern has repeated, and the world is captive to the new monopolists. We are now deep within Stage 5, monopoly exploitation, a phase defined by the monopolist's calculated use of leverage to achieve strategic, non-economic goals. For China, this means the silent weaponization of rare earth control to exert influence over geopolitics, trade, and, most critically, the military balance of power. The core danger is no longer the risk of dependency. It is the active deployment of that dependency as a tactical asset. The current geopolitical climate ensures that this leverage will be used, not merely threatened. Beijing understands that their control of processing is the equivalent of a permanent, embedded industrial bloc, a self-imposed sanction on the West's technological future. The first warning sign is complete supply chain dominance. China's control goes far beyond mining. They control the processing, the refining, and the critical manufacturing of magnets and components. No other country possesses this full vertical integration. As the Mountain Pass example painfully shows, the U.S. can mine the ore, but then it must, or until very recently had to, ship it to China for processing before buying it back as refined metals. This is not independence, it is dependency with additional logistical steps. This structural weakness gives China the ability to throttle the supply chain at any point. We have seen this tactic deployed repeatedly. In 2010, during a dispute with Japan, China restricted rare earth shipments, sending Japan's critical electronics industry into a panic. In 2019, during the heat of U.S.-China trade tensions, Chinese state media openly threatened to cut off rare earth exports entirely. The message was clear and effective. You need us more than we need you. Back off. The U.S. subsequently backed off. The second, more subtle warning sign is the strategic restriction of processing technology itself. China is now restricting the export of key rare earth separation techniques and high-performance magnet manufacturing blueprints. This move is designed not just to maintain their current monopoly, but to prevent the West from ever building the required processing capacity, even if they successfully find and fund new mines. They are weaponizing their intellectual and industrial knowledge, creating a permanent barrier to entry for any competitor hoping to achieve. Stage 2. Infrastructure development. This ensures that the decade-long window of Western vulnerability remains firmly closed. This action is crucial because of the third sign: exploding demand. The world is rushing into an electrified future. Demand for rare earths is projected to triple by 2030. This is driven by the massive expansion of the electric vehicle market. Every EV needs 10 times more rare earths than a gas car, and the proliferation of wind turbines, each requiring hundreds of kilograms of high-performance magnets. China, the monopolist, controls the supply of the core materials for the global green energy transition, giving them unparalleled leverage over Western environmental policy and corporate investment. The implications for national security are simply staggering. The U.S. military's technological edge, the foundation of its global dominance, rests entirely upon systems that require rare earths, precision guidance, stealth technology, and advanced sensors. The U.S. military is entirely dependent on Chinese rare earth supply. The consequences of a complete cutoff are not theoretical, they are an industrial collapse scenario. A rare earth cutoff means the F-35 program stops, missile production stops, the U.S. fleet cannot be maintained, undermining its capacity to project power globally. This is a strategic catastrophe that cannot be solved in the short term. While the U.S. Department of Defense maintains a strategic stockpile, it is small enough for only a few months of weapons production and entirely inadequate for a prolonged conflict or blockade. Meanwhile, China has been actively stockpiling, securing reserves, and preparing for a future where rare earths are the definitive leverage point in any geopolitical conflict. This realization forces us to confront the core truth of Stage 5, political leverage. China can now use access to these essential materials as a negotiating club, demanding concessions from nations across the globe. Want rare earths? Align with us. Don't sanction us. Don't support Taiwan. Or we cut you off and your economy collapses. That is the power of a resource monopoly, and it is actively being deployed to advance China's geopolitical goals. The U.S. is dependent, vulnerable, and currently lacks any short-term way out of this trap. The terrifying realization of the rare earth trap is not just that China controls the supply, it is that the U.S. and the West knowingly made a catastrophic strategic mistake by outsourcing production for short-term cost savings. This mistake led directly to the establishment of the monopoly, and the world is now paying the price. We are currently stuck at Stage 5, leverage, and the inevitable next phase is Stage 6, monopoly collapse. However, unlike the collapse of Britain's coal or America's oil dominance, this stage for rare earths will not happen soon, and it will not occur without devastating global consequences. The inescapable cost of dependency. If China were to pull the trigger and execute a complete cutoff of rare earth exports, a move Chinese state media openly threatened during the 2019 trade tensions, the global economy would not merely slow down, it would stop. For the global economy and daily life, the impact would be immediate and systemic. Electronics manufacturing halts. Within months, the production lines for new iPhones, new EVs, new laptops, and wind turbines would shut down. Companies like Apple, Tesla, and Samsung, which depend entirely on Chinese rare earths, would see production halt, leading to supply chain collapse and stock market crashes. No substitutes. The technology requires these specific elements. You cannot make EV motors without neodymium, or smartphone screens without europium and terbium. The modern world, which functions on the assumption of abundant, essential components, would cease to function. For national security, the risk is existential. Weapons systems failure. The U.S. military cannot build new weapons if the F-35 program stops and missile production halts, eroding the technological edge that the U.S. depends on. Precision guidance, stealth, and advanced sensors all require rare earths processed in China. Prolonged vulnerability. The U.S. strategic stockpile is small enough for only a few months of weapons production, rendering the nation vulnerable during any prolonged conflict or blockade. The question is always posed, can't the West find alternatives or mine its own way out? The answer is a qualified yes, but the timeline ensures prolonged vulnerability. 1. Mining is only half the problem. The US, Australia, and Canada have deposits, and mines like Mountain Pass are operating again. However, simply mining the ore only solves the first step of the supply chain. 2. The processing bottleneck. The critical bottleneck is processing capacity, turning the ore into usable, refined metals. China spent 30 years building this infrastructure, and the West is attempting to recreate it in a decade. Building new processing facilities requires 7 to 10 years, meaning that even if every effort began today, the West would not achieve self-sufficiency until 2035 at the earliest. The U.S. is dependent for this entire 10-year window. 3. Limited alternatives. Researchers are hunting for non-rare earth substitutes for magnets and screen materials, but the technology is not yet commercially viable, and commercialization takes years. Recycling is also underdeveloped. The U.S. produces 1.5 million tons of electronic waste annually, but recycles less than 1% of the rare earths contained within it. The rest often goes to landfills or is shipped to China for recovery, further fueling the dependency loop. The 4 great resource monopolies in modern history, Britain's coal, America's oil, OPEC's oil leverage, and now China's rare earths, all follow the same mechanical progression: discovery, development, monopoly, dependency, leverage, and eventual collapse. We are undeniably locked into the leverage stage. China's rare earth monopoly began around 2010, and unlike previous cycles, this one is hardening. Beijing is entrenching their control by restricting processing technology and building capacity, ensuring the window to break free is closing rapidly. The control of this strategic resource, the 21st century's fuel for technology and power, is creating Chinese leverage over the entire developed world. History has shown that dependency is vulnerability. When you depend on a rival for something essential, they control you. China has the West exactly where they planned: dependent, vulnerable, and with no short-term way out of the rare earth trap. The forces of history and economics are now converging, forcing the West to choose between the immediate, easy path of outsourcing and the necessary, difficult path of rebuilding industrial sovereignty. The cost of inaction is no longer counted in dollars, but in the structural integrity of our national defense, our economic security, and our ultimate place in the geopolitical order. The collapse stage is coming, but the question is whether it will be the collapse of the Chinese monopoly or the collapse of the systems that rely entirely upon it. We have entered the decisive decade.